After 10 years of marriage, he had a change of heart. It turns out some people can indeed love two people at the same time, performing the role of a model husband in front of the world while secretly keeping a mistress at the office. Later, I didn't fight or argue, I even chose to turn a blind eye. But seeing the new young man by my side drove him mad. Chapter 1. You call this taking care of a child? Leaving our daughter outside in such heavy rain? A little girl left all alone, what if she gets sick? I hurriedly embraced my daughter, listening to the surrounding reproaches. Her small body was curled up, burning with fever. My heart was breaking. Today was her birthday, and my husband, Peter, had taken her out to buy a gift, but they hadn't returned for a long time. It was the supermarket staff who called, saying the child was left alone at the entrance, and I rushed over. After getting my daughter to the hospital, I frantically called Peter. My daughter's face was flushed with fever, and she kept murmuring, "Daddy, don't leave me." She finally fell asleep on the hospital bed, and Peter finally answered his phone. I couldn't contain my anger. "Where are you? Why did you leave our daughter outside alone? Do you even know, Emma is in the hospital now?" The man's voice was filled with panic. "Honey, I'm at home. What did you just say?" Not long after, Peter showed up at the hospital, looking disheveled. "I'm sorry, honey. There was an urgent issue at the company, we almost lost millions. I got so anxious that I couldn't make it back." I couldn't hold back any longer and burst into tears, hitting and kicking him. It wasn't until my slap landed on his face that he grabbed my hand tightly. "Anna, enough. I've apologized. What more do you want?" I stared at him in disbelief, ready to curse him out. Our daughter's weak voice came from the bed. "Mommy, is Daddy back?" I held her hand, choking on my words. Peter stood by our daughter's side, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Emma. It's Daddy's fault you ended up in the hospital. When you get better, I'll take you to the amusement park." Her eyes lit up, and she shook her little head. "It's not Daddy's fault." She even reached out to pinky promise with him. Watching the heartwarming scene between father and daughter, I stood aside, speechless. Chapter 2. Back home, I carried my daughter to her room, then turned to see Peter still holding his phone, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Let me see your phone." He turned it off and pouted. "Honey, what are you doing? Couples should have some trust. Give it to me. Don't make me say it twice." He looked annoyed but reluctantly handed me his phone. All the calls were work-related. There were an unusually high number of calls from a director Chen. The chat history on WeChat was blank, and I was no longer at the top of his contacts. My name was back to my full name. Though I found nothing concrete, the fact that he forgot our daughter at the supermarket was too much. On impulse, I took my daughter back to my parents' house. I took a rare break. Peter and I had been married for 10 years, known as the perfect couple. In high school, just like in many novels, I was the goody-two-shoes in the eyes of teachers and parents, and he was the rebellious rich kid. The teacher placed him next to me, a smoker and drinker who got into fights, the typical school bully. By chance, I witnessed him getting into a fight and called out his name just as someone tried to attack him from behind. He turned around, avoiding the sneak attack. We grew closer after that. We overcame many obstacles and finally ended up together. Despite opposition from both families, we chose each other and got married. Usually, this would be a perfect ending in a TV drama. The wild young man settles down for love, becoming a cold and domineering CEO in the business world. And at home, there's the Cinderella who married into a wealthy family. In our 3rd year of marriage, we had our daughter, Emma. I always thought I was happy enough. But Peter started coming home later and later, sometimes even staying at the company overnight. When I questioned him, he would brush it off, telling me not to make a fuss, that he was earning money to buy me bags. 10 years passed, and even the strongest feelings seemed to have cracks. Chapter 3. I stayed with my parents for a month, during which Peter called me every day. Apologizing, pleading, coaxing. He said, "It's good that you're taking a break. Whenever you feel like coming back, let me know, and I'll pick you up. My daughter clung to my leg, asking when we were going home. My mother, tired of seeing me around, urged me to go back. So, I finally went back. When I returned home, the large villa was eerily quiet, with no servants in sight. Strange noises came from upstairs. I went up and was suddenly confronted by a pretty girl coming out of the study. She froze. "Who are you?" I looked at her warily. Her buttons were in disarray, and she seemed quite disheveled. "Sorry, ma'am, I'm from the company, delivering some documents." The girl responded calmly, without fault. "Miss Chen, hurry up and leave after delivering them." At that moment, Peter came out of the study. He sternly told the girl, "Can't you see my wife is back? Don't get in the way." The girl bit her lip, a hint of malice flashing in her eyes. "Goodbye, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith." With that, she left without looking back. Peter acted normal, welcoming me and our daughter back and apologizing for what happened before. "I'll put your things away." He eagerly helped me unpack, moving quickly like a whirlwind. I needed to go to the bedroom too, so I followed him and saw him slip onto the balcony. "Be careful on your way back. Message me when you get home." His gentle voice came from the balcony. His tone showed concern, something I hadn't heard in years. But a growing unease filled my heart. This incident passed, and I didn't see that girl again. Until one day, on a whim, I decided to bring him lunch at the office. Chapter 4. The employees greeted me warmly, calling me Mrs. Smith. But their scrutinizing glances and whispers followed me. The secretary at the office door stopped me, saying Peter was out for lunch. I felt a bit disappointed but didn't think much of it. "I'll just leave the lunchbox inside and go." He still blocked my way. The new receptionist gave me a disdainful look and loudly talked on the phone. These old wives nowadays only know how to suck up to men. It sounded like a veiled insult. I smirked. Since when do stray cats and dogs get into the company? I brushed past the secretary, who didn't dare stop me. As I pushed open the break room door, I saw the most disgusting scene of my life. Peter and a girl were entangled naked. The air was thick with the scent of lust. I felt faint. Hearing the noise, the girl turned around in confusion. It was the same girl who had appeared at my house. Peter was also stunned. I stumbled back, thinking I would be heartbroken, but I felt numb as I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. "Is this your new lover? The work you do every day?" My heart felt cold and I shook with anger. Divorce. Chapter 5. Peter followed me home. Standing in front of the door, I thought of our daughter inside and stopped in anger. "Don't come in," I warned. "I find you disgusting." Peter stood before me, his face dark. He still tried to persuade me. "You saw her. She's just someone I pass the time with. You're still my wife. Stop making a fuss." His tone was condescending. In his suit, the reckless young man I once knew shattered before my eyes. I stayed silent, and his expression grew impatient. "I've been so good to you all these years. Don't you know that? I publicly acknowledge you as my wife, even with your ordinary background. Don't be greedy. I promise you, she won't affect your position as my wife. Isn't that enough?" Every word trampled on my dignity. "Get out." I lost control, my vision darkening. "You make me sick." After saying this, a metallic taste filled my throat, and I collapsed. I had fainted from anger. Chapter 6. When I woke up, my daughter was by my side, crying as soon as she saw me awake. My mother was wiping her tears. "Men, you know, he admitted his mistake and cut ties with that woman. Don't be angry with yourself. Think of your child. You can't let her grow up without her parents." I didn't want to hear it. "I will divorce him. That's my bottom line. I'll find a way for the child. Where's Peter?" My mother hesitated before answering. He went to get you food. He'll be back soon. My daughter interrupted, pouting. That's not true. When Mommy was taken to the hospital, someone called Daddy and he left. My mother pinched her arm lightly, giving me an awkward smile. He had some work issues, don't overthink it. I smiled but said nothing. I no longer had any expectations for this scumbag. When Peter arrived, he knelt in front of me, tears streaming down his face. Honey, I was wrong. Don't leave me. Like every time he made a mistake and begged for my forgiveness, I've cut ties with her. Trust me, we can live happily together. His neck bore a hickey, glaringly obvious. I had no strength left to cry or even lift a hand to hit him. He brought my mother and friends every day, trying to persuade me. When I was discharged, he smiled as if we were newlyweds again. How long has it been since he smiled at me like that? A long time, I guess. I can't quite remember. I went home with him, and he carefully spoke to me, coming home early to cook. I wanted to laugh. So, he could come home early after all. But what's the point? I repeatedly asked for a divorce. He looked pitiful, kneeling by the bed. What a joke, pretending to be deeply in love. In front of him, I packed my bags and said to my daughter, Sweetie, how about a trip with Mommy? A divorce application lay on the table. I told Peter, when you sign this paper, I'll bring her back. Chapter 7. After a few weeks of traveling, I met an old acquaintance in a foreign land. The girl Peter had been infatuated with, his secretary, Director Chen in his contacts. Claire Chen. A young girl exuding youthful energy, so vibrant it was hard to look away. I smiled slightly. How have you been? Shouldn't you be getting married soon? Peter quickly pushed the girl away, anxiously explaining. Honey, I came to find you. She's the one clinging to me. I touched my chest but felt no stirrings. I coldly said, I wish you and your mistress a long, happy life. But please sign the papers soon. Otherwise, you'll always be a mistress in name only. I kindly reminded them and left, ignoring Peter's pleas. Back at the hotel, my mother called. She was playing with my daughter on the video call. Anything interesting happened today? Did you see anyone you know? Seeing her curious gaze, constantly looking behind me, I understood. My mother had told Peter my whereabouts. I massaged my forehead. I'll be back in a few days. I'll bring you a gift. I hung up before she could respond. Sister. A handsome young man popped his head out from the next room, staring at me. Are you upset because of him again? I rubbed my temples. None of your business. Stop prying. I met him during my travels, a young and handsome university student in the same travel group, now a friend. I gave him a large sum to help me stage a little drama. He agreed. Suddenly, there was a knock. A disheveled Peter and Claire appeared at the door. He peeked inside, his gaze falling on me. Honey, let me explain. Let me in. Oh, is this the ex-husband? The university student appeared, wrapping an arm around my waist. Peter's eyes turned red with rage, raising his fist. I immediately stepped in front of him. You go home first. Come find me later. The student reluctantly left, adding fuel to the fire. Sister is mine now, ex-husband. Claire's eyes followed the young man, filled with admiration. I stepped aside to let them in, crossing my legs. So, what are you here for? Peter knelt by my side. Honey, I'm really here to take you home. Come back with me. Our daughter misses you. Claire's face flashed with jealousy, then she smiled. Sister, you don't know how hard Peter has been searching for you. Stop being unreasonable. Her words made me seem unreasonable. I raised an eyebrow, noting the purple hickey on his collarbone. Why is she here? Peter stammered, unable to come up with an explanation. I came to find you, but she insisted on coming. I couldn't shake her off. She's young and alone in a foreign country. I had to bring her along. You understand, right? I nodded, and he sighed in relief at my reaction. I understand. You're passionate lovers. It's natural. Rolling in bed is expected. After all, it's a man's mistake. I joked, my gaze growing cold. Peter, I've said if you divorce, we can move on peacefully. Don't make things ugly. Anger slowly spread across his face. Anna, I told you, it's all in the past. Why can't you let it go? I came all this way, what more do you want? My eyes stung as I scolded him. You promised to cut ties with her. But what happened? You left our daughter at the supermarket to rush and sleep with her. You didn't even change Director Chen's name. Who do you think you're fooling? His face showed guilt, his hands trembling, looking away from me. Claire immediately interjected. Sister, Peter was worried about me. I couldn't let go and seduced him. Please forgive him, she cried, nearly fainting, and Peter hesitated, wanting to stand up. I gave her an ambiguous look. That won't do. I pretended to be heartbroken, my chest heaving, and downed the pills on the table. Peter panicked, patting my back. He noticed the pill bottle and a medical report on the table. He reached for it, but I quickly snatched it away. Claire attacked, grabbing it and handing it to him. She looked at me triumphantly, smiling. I returned the smile. Coincidentally, so did I. Peter's eyes turned red, a man over 6 feet tall crying uncontrollably. The cold and aloof wife lover was now a pitiful mess. Honey, I was wrong. I really was. Don't leave me. Are you choosing to leave because you don't want to burden me? I turned my head away, silent, my fingers curling tightly. After 10 years of marriage, Peter knew all my little habits. He became more certain of his thoughts. Claire looked at the report, her face breaking into a huge smile. Chapter 8. She pitifully held my hand. Sister, after you're gone, I'll take care of Emma and Peter. Don't worry. Her words completely enraged the already fragile Peter. He mercilessly kicked her away. Bitch, what did you say? You just want to take her place? How dare you curse my wife? Claire struggled to get up, looking at him in disbelief. Peter, you promised we'd be together forever. You said you were tired of that old hag, that it'd be best if she died. Claire kept provoking him, and he glanced at me nervously. I cooperated by shedding tears. Peter grabbed her chin. Bitch, you just can't stand to see me happy. When I get back, I'll deal with you. He didn't deny her words. He truly despised me, wanted a divorce, and wished I were dead to clear the way. He beat her until she was unrecognizable. In a corner where Peter couldn't see, I provocatively smiled at Claire, making her scream in anger. Peter dragged her out of the room. A few days later, I received a message. Everything's arranged. You can prepare to close the net. When I saw Peter again, I still played the heartbroken, tearful role. If you want to be with her, I'll step aside. He intertwined our fingers, something I once loved. Now, it made me sick. I asked for his phone and saw Claire had sent me taunting messages. Intimate photos of them filled the screen. Peter quickly took my phone and covered my eyes, accidentally touching my hot tears. Honey, believe me. I only love you. We won't contact her anymore. I cried myself to sleep in his arms. I could feel him gently putting me down, the faint light from his phone, and his quiet footsteps leaving. I smiled in satisfaction. Maybe I'd see something interesting. Chapter 9. Until a commotion erupted in the neighboring hotel room, a crowd blocking the entrance. They said it was a cheating scandal. But interestingly, it was a man catching his mistress with another man. What a tangled web. I packed my things and left. When Peter returned, the hospital bed was empty. He panicked, calling me, but I didn't answer. At home, my daughter hugged my leg, sweetly calling me Mommy. A warm feeling filled my heart. My mother scolded me for being carefree and neglecting my child. A few days later, Peter finally came to his senses and came home to find me. He knocked on the door repeatedly, crying to my mother about his pain, especially after the affair, how I no longer treated him as I used to. My mother listened with a heavy heart, giving me a reproachful look. She earnestly advised me about the bond of marriage and how couples should reconcile after arguments, urging me not to be too harsh. My daughter, innocent and unaware, looked at me, not understanding that her parents' relationship was beyond repair. "Mom, hasn't he been calling you Aunt Yun lately?" My mother's face froze. She suddenly remembered the rebellious young man who had once knelt before her door, begging her to let her daughter marry him. And now, Peter no longer called her Mom. His tone filled with disdain and impatience. My mother looked at Emma, lost in thought, still wanting to persuade me, but I interrupted. "Mom, you raised me alone, and now I have you and my daughter. I don't need him." Her eyes turned red, and she hugged me, crying about her poor daughter. To show his sincerity, Peter offered to transfer all his assets to me. I shook my head, only keeping the villa where I had lived for 10 years. He cried, promising to reform. I patted his back for comfort. But never trust a man's words twice. When Claire showed up heavily pregnant, she had already lost the baby. Peter had gone to the hospital to confront her, only to find her with the young university student. He overheard their conversation, realizing they had planned to take down Peter's corporation together, making it their own. With Claire's pregnancy, Peter, the fool, would believe the child was his. He beat her mercilessly, kicking her stomach, while the young student fled. Claire barely survived, losing the baby and her chance to be a mother. Guards stopped her outside, and she screamed in frustration. I glanced at her indifferently. "Your child wasn't killed by me. Your affairs are not my doing. Why are you blaming me? I'm the victim here, aren't I?" Claire stopped struggling, her eyes filled with hatred. The next news I heard was Peter being stabbed in bed, with Claire caught at the scene. A man will always be a man, unable to control his desires. Even at this point, he still thought with his lower half. Chapter 10. I heard Peter was stabbed multiple times and would spend the rest of his life bedridden. The mighty Pay Corporation was leaderless, and news of tax evasion broke out, prompting a government investigation. Someone kindly uploaded a video online of Peter hitting women, with sensitive content blurred out. Photos of him and Claire were also exposed. People discovered that the supposedly loving husband, Mr. Pay, had quite a wild private life. He abandoned his wife for a mistress, left his 4-year-old daughter at the supermarket while he enjoyed himself with the mistress. All this made people furious and disgusted. Peter became a public enemy, a rat everyone wanted to beat. And our dear protagonist could only listen to the criticisms, watching the screen filled with angry comments, his chest heaving with rage. Pay Corporation's stock plummeted. When I visited him in the hospital with the young man, he was struggling to breathe through a ventilator. "How did you end up like this? I gave you a chance, but you didn't let go." He glared at me, his once handsome face now repulsive. He was always selfish. Do you think he transferred all his assets to me? No, he was testing whether my actions were for his money. Luckily, in his rage, he agreed to the divorce, giving me half of Pay Corporation's assets. I quickly sold off all the properties under Pay Corporation to avoid any trouble. Our 10-year marriage had long soured. I knew I wasn't perfect and had given him a chance to let go. Had he admitted his faults or ended things cleanly, we might not have reached this point. My daughter held someone else's hand, not looking back at Peter. "Mommy and Daddy, let's go home. This place is boring." The young university student comforted Emma gently, giving me a look before leaving. Peter whimpered, and I impatiently told him to shut up. It felt somewhat satisfying. "Did you ever wonder why you could find me? And how you caught Claire with another man?" Fear appeared on his face. Even though I anticipated we wouldn't make it to the end, I never imagined we'd end so ugly. Casually, I shook the bottle of pills in front of him. "Idiot, can't you read? Vitamin pills." I had to make a scene and leave quietly to trigger his desire to conquer. Without a dramatic setup, how could I win him over? Otherwise, why would Peter believe I still loved him? What a joke. As I left, I added one more thing. You'll be stuck in bed for the rest of your life. We'll never meet again. He pounded the bed in frustration, and a nurse hurried in, thinking he was having an episode, injecting him with a sedative. Claire was charged with attempted murder and sentenced to 10 years. Seeing her haggard face brightened my mood. When you sent me those taunting messages, you weren't like this. How's it going? Are men worth it, worth chasing every single one? How stupid can you be, seeing him with me and still rushing to be with him? She stood up angrily, restrained by the guards. You should never have trusted a man. Why didn't you think about why I haven't worked in 10 years and stayed at home? Her thoughts seemed to align with mine. Peter's public affection masked his extreme chauvinism. His distance wasn't just because I aged but also because he resented my inability to have children. Was your baby even his? Claire's eyes widened. Peter always doubted this and that. But it was him who had the problem. To soothe his ego, we quickly adopted a daughter after marriage. I sighed, looking at her with pity. Why am I telling you all this? You can't hit me anyway. She shouted my name, her eyes filled with rage. Ignoring her, I left. It was just a casual setup. How could she resist temptation so much, wanting to play with the young man? Pay Corporation collapsed overnight due to massive tax evasion, its assets seized. Everyone turned against it. I sent a final message to the company directors and removed my SIM card. Contributing to society is my duty as a citizen. Later, I heard Peter, unable to afford treatment, was kicked out of the hospital, homeless. The once glorious Mr. Pay was now a stray dog. His indifferent parents quickly sent him to a mental institution, finding him unlucky. I boarded a plane with my daughter and mother. The young man kept calling me, but my phone was off. Looking at the blue sky outside, no man could stop me now.